สวัสดีค่ะองค์การอาหารและการเกษตรแห่งสหประชาชาติหรือ FAO ระบุค่ะว่าพื้นที่ป่าไม้ทั่วโลกมีอยู่ประมาณ 31% ของพื้นดินของโลกณปัจจุบันนะคะโดยที่ 5 ประเทศค่ะที่มีผืนป่ามากที่สุดก็คือสหรัฐอเมริกาแคนาดาบราซิลรัสเซียและจีนโดยที่ผืนป่าของ 5 ประเทศนี้รวมกันคิดเป็นครึ่งหนึ่งของผืนป่าทั้งหมดของโลกแต่ว่าทุกวันนี้ถูกทำลายไปไม่น้อยเลยทีเดียวไม่ใช่เฉพาะ 5 ประเทศนี้นะคะแต่ว่าทั่วทุกมุมโลกสำหรับผืนป่าค่ะเราก็ทราบกันดีนะคะว่าผืนป่านั้นสำคัญต่อชีวิตของพวกเรายังไงเป็นแหล่งต้นกำเนิดของน้ำของอากาศบริสุทธิ์มองเรามองโลกค่ะจะเอาภาพยนตร์สารคดีสั้นที่ชื่อว่า Hope in a Changing Climate มาให้ท่านผู้ชมได้ชมกันนะคะโดยที่แปลเป็นไทยตามตัวเลยก็คือความหวังท่ามกลางสภาวะอากาศที่เปลี่ยนแปลงค่ะโดยที่สารคดีเรื่องนี้นะคะมีการถ่ายทำที่ประเทศจีนเอธิโอเปียและรวันดาผู้กำกับก็คือคุณจอห์นหลิวและโปรดิวเซอร์นะคะคือ EEMP ค่ะย่อมาจาก Environmental Education Media Project เป็นองค์กรไม่หวังผลกำไรนะคะมีสำนักงานอยู่ในจีนมุ่งที่จะเผยแพร่ข้อมูลเกี่ยวกับสิ่งแวดล้อมและการพัฒนาอย่างยั่งยืน
My name is John D. Liu. I've been documenting the changes on the plateau for 15 years. I first came here in 1995 to film an ambitious project where local people were constructing a new landscape on a vast scale, transforming a barren land into a green and fertile one. The project certainly changed my life, convincing me to become a soil scientist. Here on the Lus Plateau, I've witnessed that people can lift themselves out of poverty. They can radically improve their environment, and by doing so, reduce the threat of climate change.
ภาพยนตร์สารคดีสั้น Hope in a Changing Climate ได้รับรางวัลมาแล้วในหลายเวทีทั่วโลกนะคะที่เป็นเทศกาลภาพยนตร์เกี่ยวกับป่าไม้และสิ่งแวดล้อมค่ะ
This is China's Lus Plateau. Until recently, this was one of the poorest regions in the country. A land renowned for floods, mudslides, and famine. But with the fanfare comes the hope of change for the better. When I first came to the Lus Plateau, I was astounded by the degree of poverty and degradation. And I wondered, how could the Chinese people, the largest ethnic group on the planet, and my fathers and my own ancestors, come from a place that was this barren? China's Lus Plateau is a region that stretches for 640,000 square kilometers across north-central China. Unspoiled valleys in neighboring Sichuan show us how it might once have looked. It's the sort of natural abundance that is necessary to support an emerging civilization. How could a landscape with such potential have been reduced to this? When Chinese scientists and civil engineers began to survey the area, they realized that several thousand years of agricultural exploitation had denuded the hills and valleys of vegetation. The relentless grazing of domestic animals on the slopes meant that there was no chance for young trees and shrubs to grow. The rainfall no longer seeped into the earth, but simply washed down the hillsides, taking the soil with it. Over millennia, this progressively destroyed the region's fertility. When this happens over an area as extensive as the plateau, millions of tons of silt are swept down into the Yellow River, which gets its name from the color of the fine, loose soil. On the plateau, the researchers realized that progressive degradation of the environment trapped the local population into a life of subsistence farming. It's a process that has occurred throughout the world, where poor agricultural communities find themselves overusing their land in order to survive, depleting its fertility and further impoverishing themselves. 15 years ago, Chinese and international experts were confident it could be. They decided that to prevent further erosion, it was necessary to cease farming on certain key areas to allow the trees and shrubs to grow back. But this could not happen without the consent of the farmers themselves. What eventually convinced the local people was the assurance that they would have tenure of their land, that they would directly benefit from the effort they invested in the new project.
我们的这个做法就是这个规划就是山上
The goal
戴帽子
was to give a
山
hat
有
to
这
the
个戴子
hilltops, give
沟
a
底
belt
穿
to
靴
the
子
hills as well as shoes at the base.
山上戴帽子就是山上全部都种草
The hat meant that the top of these hills had to be replanted with trees.
这个摇铃子的就是推楼田
The belt meant that terraces had to be built to be used for crop planting and also for trees.
沟底穿靴子就是打坝
The shoes were the dams which we had to build so that the hills could grow back to life and our economy as well as our lives could improve.
这个经济能够发展，人民能够生活。
Hills and gullies were designated as ecological zones to be protected. Farmers were given financial compensation for not farming on them and keeping their livestock penned up. The effort that people put into converting their slopes into terraces has resulted in a marked increase in agricultural productivity. The higher yields are directly related to the return of natural vegetation in the surrounding ecological land. Now when it rains, the water no longer runs straight off the slopes. Trapped by the vegetation, it sinks into the ground where it is retained in the soil, taking weeks and months to gently seep down and irrigate the fields and terraces below. Restoration has occurred over an area of 35,000 square kilometers. The impact of such an enormous addition of vegetation goes far beyond the plateau itself. There's been a significant reduction in the soil rushing down into the Yellow River. As I've been traveling around the Lus Plateau, I've seen extensive changes. The vegetation cover on the hillsides, on the tops of the hills, and down in the valley, everything has changed. It's changed the lives of the people. And in fact, the people themselves have done this because they were the ones who changed their behaviors, terraced the fields, improved the soils, learned to protect the marginal areas. The changes are not simply on the hillsides. On the plains, you can see greenhouses that are filled with vegetables. This extends the growing season. It's very high value produce. As a result of its success, the lessons learned from the Lus Plateau rehabilitation are now being applied all over China. But could such projects work elsewhere in less centrally controlled societies with fewer resources and different soils?